Today on Locked On Phoenix Suns, my final full grade of the Suns offseason. Hear why I'm so high on what James Jones, Matt Ishbia, and company accomplished this summer. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Brendon Kleen, your host. Welcome into the show. I am a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, and your host each and every day. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen to kick off your week. We got a little bit of offseason left before training camp is here in less than a month. Appreciate you starting your day with the show. Hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. Get a new one, in your feed Monday, Wednesday, Friday through the rest of August. Back to daily starting in September when the players are back to daily. Hit that button, get a new episode. Become an everydayer. Get locked onto the Phoenix Suns right here every day. Today's episode brought to you by the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get any ticket you need and $20 off that first purchase. Terms apply. Time for grades. Feels a little weird to do this on August 12th, but the Suns kept us on our toes. A little bit of a roster spot open, and then Okogie gets a big deal, and then, hey, are they going to actually cut David Roddy? Let's see what he does at Summer League. So we'll get to the big picture. I'll start with the more details of just the personnel changes that happened. And then I want to look at the bench actually a little closer based on something Doc Rivers said on Bill Simmons' podcast this weekend. But let's just get right to it, okay? I'm giving the Suns a B+ this offseason, okay? I'm giving the Suns a B+, and I will tell you why. My criteria this offseason, and I've said it to you every step of the way, is to get one more surefire playoff rotation player in the door. Okay? Now, there would have been a lot of ways to do that, right? I mean, I don't know how realistic each and every one of these was, but just for the sake of laying it out there, they could have traded up in the draft. They could have swung a big deal for Jusuf Nurkic using his contract, in which case they would have actually had to add 2 guys because they would have been taking one away with Nurkic. They could have signed a player on the minimum market. They could have, in theory, there's a world where they strip this thing down and get rid of Nurkic and Allen or even one of the big 3 and then get back under that second apron, and they can use their mid-level, and they can make different kinds of trades. And again, not that all that stuff was going to happen, but I think a lot of us entered this offseason feeling like everything was sort of on the table, right? We know how all-in Matt Ishbia is. We know how disappointing really the whole regular season was, but especially the sweep in the first round of a series the Suns were favored to win. So it felt like, hey, they need to do something. They need to get better. And they don't have a ton of pathways to doing that because they're strapped with the new CBA. But look, they have plenty of things that they can look at. They went into the offseason in terms of these surefire playoff rotation players with obviously the big 3, Book, Beal, Durant. And then I would say on top of that, Nurkic, Allen, O'Neal. Are those the best possible role players the Suns could ever get? No. But they were 3 guys who played in last year's playoffs and who I think are good enough that unless some extreme drop-off or injury happens, I would expect that if they're on the roster in Game 1 of next postseason, they will be plenty good enough to get minutes when that time comes. And so my criteria was if they have 6, at least get to 7. At least, right? And so part of why I'm glad I waited to do the grade or really try to sum up the whole offseason until now is I frankly don't think that they had actually added another one until they got Tyus Jones. right? Because they didn't really add new players much before that. I guess that's not fully fair, but a lot of the biggest moves were re-signing guys. Royce O'Neal, Josh Okogie on a bigger contract, getting Bull back. They did get Monte Morris. Maybe I could have made a case that he would be a surefire playoff rotation player before they get Tyus, but I think we all agree Tyus Jones has jumped ahead of him in the rotation, in the hierarchy of everything now. But, Ryan Dunn, Oso Ighodaro, I'm not positive. I'm optimistic about them as players for the most part, but this year, playoffs, I think that's a stretch. It's rare that rookies can do that. And especially rookies taking 22 and, 40 or whatever Oso was. So they didn't really fully get there until they got Tyus Jones, but I think he absolutely checks that box. He is somebody with a defined skill set that we know can work in the playoffs. He's somebody that has a role on this team that we know will help in terms of adding structure, cutting back on turnovers, upping the pace and the tempo that they play with, knocking down open shots, being able to defend point guards and create turnovers. He's been in the playoff rotation every year that he's been in the playoffs as an NBA player, and I don't expect that to change. So there you go. They got one. They're up to 7 guys that I would confidently count as surefire playoff rotation players. Now, I think you could make a case for Mason Plumlee as well. I think he's plenty solid enough. He's older and everything, but as far as backup centers go, I could easily see him playing, being a positive presence. No big deal. The reason I don't count him, let's call him like a half maybe, is just honestly in the NBA these days, there's a lot of games in the playoffs where not even one traditional center gets heavy minutes, let alone 2. So, if you're asking me like the ultimate destiny of this team to win playoff games and win playoff rounds, is Plumlee in that group? Is he for sure playing getting a heavy role? I'm not sure. Maybe the best, the real backup. I don't even know if Nurkic is going to be on the team. That's getting us into the next segment. Point is, maybe we call Plumlee a half. So maybe we say the Suns have 7.5. And so if I compare that to my best case offseason, which I did at the beginning of the whole summer, before anything had happened, before the draft, before there were really many rumors, frankly. In that exercise, the Suns got Chris Dunn, Goga Bitadze, Grant Williams, and Trey Mann. They drafted Kel'el Ware, and they drafted Jalen Bridges. I'll say I called my shot on that one. I got that one right. And so they basically got similar guys, right? They got Plumlee instead of Bitadze. They got Tyus instead of Dunn. They got Monte Morris instead of Trey Mann. I guess, it's all kind of made up, of course. And then they got Dunn and Oso instead of Ware and Bridges. Of course, they got Bridges too, just in the UDFA market. And so that kind of, it's not too different. Obviously, some of the guys that I reached for in that guessing game were players who didn't even end up getting minimums, and I've covered that a bunch as the offseason has come to a close here, that the Suns' best-case scenario might not have even been an option in terms of the free agency side of things specifically. But looking at that best-case offseason exercise, the biggest name, and not even this player specifically, but Grant Williams is on that list. Grant Williams was a guy that in that exercise I traded Yusuf Nurkic for, and, it's not that I think Grant Williams would be some no-brainer target that I think the Suns dropped the ball by missing out on. It's more just that type of player they do still need, right? So when I think of, again, giving the Suns a B+, why did I not go further to an A? I think a lot of us would agree that they knocked the ball out of the park on almost every single move that they made. Well, maybe it's unfair, but to me, I would say that yes, I am saying that they didn't get an A because of the moves that they didn't make that they could have made. Maybe they weren't really there. Maybe it's just an unfair standard, but that's where I'm at. They did great with what they had, but they didn't really go outside the expectations like we thought they might. An A-range grade for me would have been pulling off a big trade involving Nurk that makes you a better team. Having your bargain signing instead of being a point guard, which we agree they need, but they already had Monte Morris. If they had been instead able to maybe get a playable wing like Kelly Oubre, Derek Jones, Najee Marshall. Again, not players who actually went for a minimum, so perhaps it's unfair to grade them that way. But I'm going to hold, look, the standard's high. This team wants to win a championship. So hitting a bunch of singles and doubles is great. Maybe you call Tyus Jones a triple, but I'm not giving an A grade for even a triple. You got to really, really make the team significantly better. And I don't think that quite happened. They made the team better. I wouldn't say significantly better. So I land on the B+. Let's talk about the big picture, though, something I've praised the Suns for throughout the offseason as well, which is creating flexibility. I'll tell you how they did it and why I think it'll be so important once again coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, whether that's a supercharger, roof rack, exhaust kit, LED headlights, or beyond. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And we're back. Let's keep it rolling here. Creating flexibility. That's the other big thing the Suns did in addition to adding playoff rotation depth. I want to remind you guys to check out Locked On NBA all throughout the offseason. I believe they're still going daily, even during the dog days of August, for daily breakdowns of the latest news and rumors and patterns and trends across the whole league. When you look at Royce O'Neal coming back for $11 million, give or take each year, Josh Okogie for $8 million, keeping Yusuf Nurkic and to a lesser extent Nasir Little, keeping that 2031 first-round pick that the Suns still have access to trade, adding 2 more second-round picks to their disposal with the series of moves that they made, trading back in the first round and then trading up a little bit in the second round, but they net out with a couple more of those to use. I'm not saying that they will or should get traded, but don't forget Ryan Dunn, Oso Ighodaro, those are players that are going to have value. The Suns have more assets to trade than they did going into the season, and certainly more than they did immediately in the aftermath of the Bradley Beal trade. So if you trace it even further, getting O'Neal, getting Grayson Allen, getting Nasir Little, and then this summer's moves, they have stockpiled some assets that they're actually going to be able to manipulate a little bit and keep getting better rather than being stuck. The other thing that they did in order to create flexibility, or that helped them create flexibility, is they got deeper, right? The Suns got deeper. We talked about it in that last segment in terms of Tyus and maybe Plumlee are surefire playoff rotation players, but the bottom line is, forget that. Let's talk about regular season rotation players. The Suns, since that Beal trade, have added, 4 or 5 of those, right? If you're thinking Plumlee and Jones, Grayson Allen, let's say Nurkic and Ayton is 1 for 1, so I'll leave that, but Allen, O'Neal, this summer Monte Morris I would include, Bol I would include. That's 5 regular season rotation players that they did not have before. So it's easier now to make moves with those assets that they have without imploding the whole team, right? So the Suns deserve a lot of credit for that. I think once it became clear that maybe that big Nurkic trade wasn't going to be there this summer, which I've talked about, no other team, and I'll get there in a second again, really made a trade like that. So fair enough. And maybe once it became clear that, like, yeah, maybe, you know, those wings I mentioned, or even a Chris Dunn, or whatever their other targets could have looked like, were not actually going to be available on minimum deals, I think it's perfectly reasonable for the Suns to pivot and say, okay, maybe we can only cap out at a B plus type of summer, but let's make the most of that. So I salute. They did a great job doing that. It matters a lot. Part of why I'm not going to factor that in and bump up the grade accordingly is, look, this is still a step toward what I think we all would agree they still need to do. That move still needs to happen, right? I don't think that this team is on paper or chemistry or really in any way you would want to slice it up. Nobody's going to be looking at the Phoenix Suns right now as a favorite to win the Western Conference, a favorite to win the NBA championship. And that's fine. They're in the mix. That's all you can really ask for. But that next move needs to come. So they created the structure to be able to make that move, which they didn't have as much before, but they still got to make it. Still, let's look at the other teams over the second apron again, just to remind ourselves that comparatively speaking, the Suns are in a good spot, and they did more with less, I think, than anyone else. The Wolves, they have their Bradley Beal type contract in Rudy Gobert, which is that they gave up a lot to go get that player, but they probably would not get as much back for that player, and he's somewhat of a tough fit. Right? So, kind of a wash. Their Durant is sort of Cat. Obviously, KD's better, but they can't really get rid of Cat given how much money he makes and how much, you know, another team would have to give up and the difficulty of that type of a trade without getting worse. And in order to get better at all, the Wolves had to swing for the fences with the Rob Dillingham trade in the draft in order to upgrade, which required multiple future picks that are pretty risky to give up. The Celtics had to bring everybody back to stay competitive. And of course, I'm not trying to downgrade that or anything, but it's not as if they, you know, pulled a rabbit out of a hat and suddenly, you know, got even better. No, they just are running it back, and that's going to be a very scary team, but it's not as if they were any more creative with their flexibility of all this second apron stuff than any other team. They just have good players. They'll bring them back. Bucks, they got Gary Trent and DeLon Wright. Great minimum contracts. I would say, you know, just as good as Tyus Jones, all things considered, that Gary Trent deal. DeLon Wright, you know, we'll see, but he just got traded for, I believe, a first-round pick last year or decent draft capital and was making $8 million last year. So it's not as if DeLon Wright was a surefire thing to get on a minimum. So salute to Milwaukee. They did a good job there. But they kind of also have that Beal Gobert type of contract or situation for themselves where Chris Middleton would kind of be the obvious guy to get rid of, right? He'd be the player where you would say his contract, his value, like get rid of him, try to see what you can do. But his injury history, his, you know, whatever, it's not really possible. So he's stuck there. And then there were these rumors about trading Brook Lopez, but that would have made them worse, right? Because, you know, they can't aggregate salaries, they can't take back more money than they send out, and all these things, which I probably should have reminded you guys of as we've been talking about this. That's the flexibility that the Suns really were trying to generate themselves. But, you know, the Bucks have one player where they could really do that in Brook Lopez, who actually has value, and they would have been a worse team. I think they realized that. So they basically stood pat. They're going to add players in the draft, Gary Trent, DeLon Wright, and hope that health and better chemistry between Dame and Giannis gets them there. The Suns are the most flexible team now of anybody over the second apron. I believe that. They are in a better position to improve than anyone else in this position. I guess you could say the Celtics, but that's going to have to be a big move, right? The Suns have some small moves now that they can make to reorient their rotation, their supporting cast, their role players without really sacrificing depth or hurting their team, but also with the upside of making their team a lot better. With that said, Doc Rivers mentioned on a reaction podcast that he did with Bill Simmons to the gold medal game on Saturday, which you should check out our reaction podcast from a Suns standpoint as well if you have not already. That's on the Locked On Suns feed. But Doc made this point about the Suns, I believe it was Doc, where he said the Suns with their bench additions are quietly setting themselves up to be a lot better. One of the better benches in the NBA. I think it was Doc Rivers. Now I'm second guessing myself because I listened to too many podcasts. Is that true? Do the Suns have the best bench in the NBA? Do they have a top 3 bench, top 5 bench? How much of a weapon will that actually be? We'll break it down coming up next. All right, closing out the show, let's talk benches, okay? I think the Suns absolutely have a top 10 bench in the NBA now, and it could be even better than that. I talked about creating flexibility. I talked about adding a surefire rotation player, playoff rotation player. The other thing that I've hit on as one of the themes of this summer for the Suns, which I think matters here, is they raise their floor with veterans as opposed to young, lottery ball acquisitions. And I think that will make them better game to game, raise their floor, keep them in games, prevent those fourth quarter implosions. It'll just have so many ripple effects to make them a better team. But the thought experiment is kind of fun anyway, because I say, okay, for sure top 10, maybe higher. The Suns were bottom 5 in total bench points last year. And bench points isn't the only way to measure it, but look, nobody really does full hockey substitutions in the NBA anymore, so you're not really going to say, like, the 5-man lineup for the bench is this and compare them team to team, because teams stagger, teams are just too smart to allow their best players to both be on or all be on the bench together when you don't have to do that. But even if you look at it from the standpoint in the Suns side of things, where let's call it a majority bench lineup, a lineup with 3+ bench players. They basically had no good lineup like that. Eubanks and Okogie in particular were such big negatives that it hampered the whole entire team. None of the young guys really worked outside of Bowl late in the season. And Eubanks in particular, he was in a lot of the heaviest usage, heaviest minutes lineups that you would look at with 3 or more bench players, or really any bench players. He often would be in there. But they're all negative because he was just he just was not good. Obviously, Royce and Bull stepped up late, but it wasn't really enough to make this bench look good at all. And we saw how much it hurt, right? Not only when the Suns had injuries, they just didn't have enough players to be competitive in games. Talked about the fourth quarter, those early fourth quarter moments especially, where you just need to give your guys one last break before they hit the gas for the last 7-8 minutes. And even that wasn't 3, 4, or 5 minutes wasn't enough. The Suns didn't even have enough to hold on to leads or stay within reach during that stretch because they were so thin. So they fixed it this year in a lot of ways. They don't have anybody who's going to compete for 6th man of the year, although maybe Grayson Allen could. But I look at it as the 5 players I think will get the most minutes off the bench, who I think will be in the rotation opening night if we assume the Suns play 10 guys. Monte Morris. Well, let's say for starters, the starting lineup is Jones, Beal, Booker, Durant, Nurkic. Okay, so then the bench is Morris, Allen, Royce O'Neal, Bol, Mason Plumlee. Again, you're not bringing a former All-Star off the bench. You're not going to get a guy, leading the way for 6th man of the year necessarily or anything like that, but that's just solid. It's veteran. It fits 1 through 5. It has all the components of a real lineup. It's not just like throwing guys out there. And again, I think it'll really make a difference. So I looked last year. I thought the Magic and the Pacers had the best benches among good teams. Kind of like from start to finish of the season, let's say. Although the Pacers team changed a lot. But they, in the playoffs reminded us of this with Nembhard, TJ McConnell, Obi Toppin, even their center Isaiah Jackson's a pretty fun energy big. Now they have more, depth of good players, so they're going to have potentially Ben Mathurin coming off the bench, who's, a lottery pick not too long ago, and on top of all those other guys and everything. So they're still going to be there. The Magic have freaking Jonathan Isaac. They kept everybody. Cole Anthony's already kind of like the ideal, like traditional six-man spark plug type of player. He'll be back doing his thing. So those two will stick around. And I think from what we've seen this offseason and just sort of what the playoffs showed us and everything else, the Thunder, the Warriors, the Knicks, and the Mavs I have in the mix. Those are the 6, and then I do think the Suns are in there. However, I will tell you, I think the Suns are at the end of that list. So I have it as the Suns are, in my opinion, and this is hard again, it's hard to measure, right? It's hard to measure because you can't just say, this is their bench lineup, capital B, capital L. What was its net rating and all this? It's not really like that. A bench is sort of a thing that you feel over the course of a season, that you stack up from a standpoint of fit and chemistry and, basically limiting mistakes and everything else. So I still think 7th, but you might even have them lower. You might have them higher, but here was my list. Knicks, number 1, which is crazy because they made multiple big trades since over the past 12 months, and they still have a really deep team. McBride, DiVincenzo, Achua, Hart, those guys all should be coming off the bench. That's filthy, to be honest with you. Thunder, I had 2nd. A lot of people will probably say OKC's at the top. They're going to stagger their bigs, so you're probably going to have like Chet as a backup sort of center in addition to being the starting power forward on this team. That's going to be crazy. They could stagger Jalen Williams if they want to as well. But on top of that, I think that they'll bring Caruso off the bench and have Dort continue to start. So that means Kassan Wallace, Isaiah Joe, their sharpshooter, Caruso, J-Dub, Chet, that could be their like backup unit. I mean, that is filthy, but it includes 2 starters. So I'm kind of like, how much do I count that? So I had him 2nd. 3, I have Dallas. I mean, look, I like Dante Exum. I like Quentin Grimes. Both of those guys might not even play much, depending, because Dinwiddie, Kleba, obviously, where am I looking here? The center spot, Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford, and then Najee Marshall, who they signed this offseason. Plus, like Prosper, their pick the other last year. Jaden Hardy's still in the mix here. Kessler Edwards they signed. Dwight Powell's starting for Team Canada. He's like the 5th string center now. So Dallas is just kind of like the Suns. No great standout player necessarily, but a lot of solid depth. I have the Magic in 4th. 5th is the Warriors, kind of, again, fairly similar. You're going to have guys like Melton, Heald, maybe Trace Jackson-Davis. You got Kyle Anderson. Like, it's just a bunch of smart, savvy vets. I might have them too high. Maybe I put the Suns ahead of them. Let's just do it. Let's do it. Bol and Grayson Allen, I'll take them over Trace Jackson-Davis any day. But I will have the Pacers 5th. I'll put the Suns 6th. I'll have the Warriors 7th. That's still really good, guys. Like, again, the Suns were bottom 5 in total bench points last year. They basically had no lineups from their reserves that would come in and impact games much at all. They had legitimate negatives coming on the floor every night in Drew Eubanks, Josh Okogie, all those young guys. It's going to be night and day this year. They're going to go from having a bench that lost them games to a bench that will, at the very least, not lose them any games and could, on the right nights, somebody like Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal could get hot, Bol could get hot. Their defense will be solid in that unit, could win them some games. And on nights when they are hurt or have absences among that starting group, it'll show its value even more because they won't be going from having to have, when Durant missed games here and there last year, or Booker, you were talking about, Nasir Little starting, talking about Jordan Goodwin getting heavy minutes. It's not going to be like that this year. So I might not agree that the Suns have like a close to the best bench in the whole league, but 6? I mean, damn, there's not much difference between 6 and 1. And it doesn't even matter in the context of the league. It matters in the context of this team. And it is going to be really huge for them, without a doubt. So there you go. B+, 6th best bench in the league. Got to be feeling pretty good. This team is firing on all cylinders heading into the season, I should say. And look, Book and KD are riding high with those gold medals around their necks. So not a lot of bad things you can say about the Suns right now. We'll see how it progresses, of course, as the offseason rolls along. And training camp begins in the not-too-distant future. So hit follow, hit subscribe right here on this channel or on wherever you're listening audio-wise to get updates 3 times a week the rest of the month, back to daily in September, and on through the season. I will catch you guys on Wednesday.